questions here are very general in nature. Every one of your associations is a little bit different. You have different governing documents, different specific points. And wow, that's really important when it comes to collections, because you all have collection policies, hopefully designed by your attorney. And those collection policies are specific and different, but what's nice is generally they're the same. They're very similar to each other. So if I call out specific dates or timelines, just understand that it may not match up with your association exactly, but it's to give the example so you understand how the system works. The plan for today is to give you an overview and understanding of how collections works and what your part as a board member is in the collection process. That's really where we want to go with this. The thing about collections is it is kind of difficult to talk about because there are so many nuances to the differences in how things work. As we'll talk later, but it's like there's those people that are just late and they're paying at the end of the month and it gets here. Then there's those people who have gone into bankruptcy, they're never going to pay. There's those people who their house is upside down and they just decided to give it up. And every one of those situations is different, and there's other situations as well. So some of them it's just forgetfulness, some of it's a hardship. And so every little nuance is out there, and we're probably not going to hit on all the nuances. Let's talk about the big picture. Again, we are nonprofit, mutual benefit corporations, so we're doing this for the benefit of all of us, and you are part of them. We are all part of the same team. You are a homeowner, just like everybody else, that you're helping to try and make their payments on time. The fact is that, now the next page is the Civil Code page, we should just glance at real quickly. You are really helped a lot by the Civil Code. Your homeowners look at you as the bad guy. You are the one who has, slammed the hammer down. You're trying to get the money out of them. You're the one having to say, you've got to do this. In fact, if it goes far enough to where it gets to the attorney, all of a sudden you really can't talk to him anymore. The attorney has to talk to him, and the homeowner feels isolated and like you're being the big meanie. And it's truly not you being a mean person. It's the way the system was designed to make life better for you and better for your homeowners. So there are a number of Civil Code points that you would just kind of want to be aware of. Do not try to replicate this as part of what you think is exact, because I really extrapolated out just the key words to save space, or I'd give you a book this thick because the Civil Code's pretty thick. But basically, in the one part of the Civil Code, it reminds us that you're going to be managed by an association. The manager truly is the association, and they delegate management to a manager that you hire. So the association manages the community, and as board members, you kind of run the association. And then it directly tells you that you're to levy regular and special assessments sufficient to perform the obligations under the governing documents. That could be read two ways. The way I like to read it is, make sure you have enough money in the budget. That was last month's discussion. Now this month's discussion is, don't assess more than you need. Don't go overboard, because you want to assess the right amount. The Civil Code is making that clear to you. And then it talks about the amount you can assess as far as a late payment fee, 10% or $10, whichever is greater, or less than that if your governing documents specify a lesser amount. So you do have to know what your governing documents say. Most governing documents don't touch on it too much. The more modern ones, actually, when they touch on it, they align with the Civil Code. But very older documents might limit you to 5% or $5 or something like that. You have to know what your governing documents say. Typically, it's 10% or $10, whichever is greater. So if your maintenance fee is $100, $10 is 10%. But if it's $200, $20 is 10%. And you can go as high as $20 on your fee. And for those that have $500 and $600 and $800 maintenance fees, 10% is 10%. You can get that much for them being late. In 1367.1, it talks about the regular special assessments. The fact is, what I'm trying to say in that portion of the code is, you're entitled to collect not only the assessment that they owe, but all the related costs to that. It costs you money to try and collect these fees from these people. The Civil Code is authorizing you to collect that money. That's what 1367.1a is trying to say. and they want you to follow the civil code. Then in 1365.1b, something you'll look very familiar to you. In fact, I've got a sample of it here. You get every year from, well, I should say it this way. You give to all of your homeowners, you receive from your management company every year the required disclosures. In those disclosures, they tell the homeowners and you some specific points, again, to make your job easier. That way, they can't come and say, oh, gee, you never told me. Well, yeah, we did tell you. In fact, we tell you every year that this money is due and that you have to pay it. It's not me, Mr. Board Member, being the bad guy. It's the way the civil code reads. We have to do this. As board members, we're obligated to help enforce the governing documents, and our part in doing that is we have to also enforce the collections. And I'm sorry you're having a tough time, but guess what? I'm not being a mean guy. I'm just enforcing what I'm required to enforce. Then in that page that you have, which is the excerpts, down through the bottom of that page are the actual key points that have come out of that disclosure. The civil code mandates the exact language that you get mailed out to you every year. We took this and added some additional points elsewhere in the civil code unrelated to collections and attached it, made a 6-page document out of it, because there's a whole lot of things that we have to tell the homeowners every year. But these 2 pages are summarized here. And it is interesting to note that it says in the civil code that the fee is delinquent 15 days after it's due. So if it's due on the 1st, that's pretty typical. On the 15th, at the end of the business day, if it hasn't been received, it's delinquent. That's per the civil code. It's not some arbitrary thing that you chose or somebody chose before you. They've kind of said that's the way the rules are. And yet your governing documents could specify something slightly different. Then, by the way, there are some older documents that allowed for 30 days, and that's true. I worked in one of those associations at one time, and so the older documents may still have that 30-day timeline, but most of them are coming around to the 15-day timeline. But it also goes on to tell the homeowners that failure to pay your association may result in, and then it goes on this litany of stuff that it can result in. Taking your house away from you, judicial and non-judicial foreclosure. It tells them the whole gamut. So they are notified every year about how important it is to make your payment and make your payment on time. When it gets into, for delinquent assessments or dues in excess of $1,800, or it has to be longer than 12 months, then you can actually go into this foreclosure process, be it judicial or non-judicial. And in a foreclosure, the association can recover all that money. The assessments, the late fees, the attorney's fees, the fees charged by anybody else who has to charge you for their services to get things accomplished. All of that is recoverable. And the real problem, of course, as we know, is how do we get that money? We'll get to that later on. I bolded the fact that the association may not use non-judicial foreclosure to collect fines or penalties, and that's because that does have to get segregated out. The law is pretty clear that process of foreclosure is intended to collect the maintenance fees, and if they've violated the CC&Rs and you've given them a fine or a penalty, that's not part of what you can foreclose a house on. So if they fail to pay the fines and penalties, but they pay their HOA fees, you cannot go out and foreclose on their property just because they have some outstanding violation fees, okay? That's pretty clear in here also. Then it goes on to say that there's a timeline that is specific. We have to be careful about following the timeline. And I say it's specific, but in fact, different attorneys have different feeling about exactly what those days and weeks and numbers are. But it does say in the Civil Code, if you fail to follow the timeline accurately, any additional costs you have to pay, you cannot pass those costs on to the person who's delinquent. So you've got to be careful about doing it so you're not overpaying with the cost of collection, because if you are forced to pay extra fees because you did something wrong in the process of collecting, you may have to eat those costs. You can't pass those on to the person who's late. There's another section that talks about payments, and the part you want to know about there is that An association may not initiate foreclosure without participating in alternative dispute resolution. And that's a good key point. You have to allow them to come in and dispute the fact that they owe the money if they choose to do that. You can't just slap them and try to collect the money and not offer them a chance to communicate about it. In the meetings and payment plans section, the important things there are that the last sentence pretty much, the board of directors must meet with an owner who makes proper written request for a meeting to discuss a payment plan. And what I want you to hear about that one is they're saying the owner requests it. It isn't like you have to offer them, would you like a payment plan? You can do that, and it's certainly thoughtful to do that, but the Civil Code says they need to ask for it. So if they don't ask for it, you can carry forward with your plans. The nice thing to do when you know they're in trouble is remember that they're your neighbors, they're your friends, and they're just in trouble. And if that's the case, be thoughtful. Maybe you want to offer them a payment plan. And the Civil Code talks about a plan if one exists in your association, that they have to be notified about what that plan is, what the particulars are. Most associations don't have a predefined plan. They kind of make it up as they go. And what typically happens is when they make the request, in our case, for example, if I was the collections officer, which I'm not, but if I was, I would have a chat with them and say, what's doable for you? What would work for you? And then they would share with me what would work for me, and I would pass that on, say, to the attorney who's involved in collections and say, this is the kind of what they're talking about being able to do, and then they develop a plan and put it together. So the real deal is have a plan, to say, allow them to talk about a plan. That's pretty important. The purpose of all this is to uphold the governing documents and that you're not the tyrant, you're just a board member doing your duty, trying to make sure the collection process works. It's really important that you treat all homeowners equitably. The fact is that you can't take your good friend over here and say, well, I know you're late, but I'll tell you what, I'll let you slide because you're my buddy. And then go to this home over here and say, I'm sorry, you are late, you are in serious trouble, and start really mandating things. You've got to be fair on both sides. Treat everybody equally in that regard. The truth is that every payment plan, every method of going toward the foreclosure process is going to be individualized based on these specific circumstances, but in general, you treat everybody equally so that you're not mistreating and doing something called discrimination, okay? That's pretty important. Again, I'm going to say it again and again. Check your governing documents for any specifics about timelines and specific things you may need to do. So payments are due the 1st and typically late on the 15th. Then what happens? Pretty much in most cases, on the 16th or thereabout, a late fee is assessed. And that, believe it or not, people say, what's the big deal? You push a computer button, it's just late. Well, there's a lot more to it than that because there's tracking that goes on, and we have to be aware of all kinds of things that take time to process. So it's nice to note that, yes, the fee is assessed. Whether it gets posted to their account on the 16th or the 29th is not a big deal as long as it gets posted that month because they were, in fact, late. The statute, again, made it real clear that it's 15 days, and that's what most of us do. So don't feel bad about saying, I'm just following the statute. That's the way the law reads. We need to do it that way. What will happen from PPM is once they're late, if the payment hasn't arrived within the next week or two, the accounting person generates a late statement and sends it off to them. Now they've got that little reminder, the late statement that says, by the way, we haven't got your payment yet. It's not a letter that says, by the way, we haven't got your payment. It's a copy of their statement showing that it's unpaid. And I presume, is it stamped? Ooh. Is it stamped late or delinquent? No, it's just this copy of the statement is all it is. So that is their first reminder. That works really well for those folks who are on coupon books because they don't see statements unless they're late. But that's the first indication they get. So if they've been sick or out of town and they forgot to make their payment, that prompts them, they get their payment made, and yes, they have to include the late fee that you charge right with that payment. I want to mention to you that the late payment fee is really only charged to encourage them to pay on time. It's not meant to be an income source for you. Obviously, you may know in your particular association, I've got this 10% of the folks over here who never pay on time. I'm going to collect hundreds of dollars from them because I know they're not going to pay on time. I think I'll put that in my budget and plan to spend that money on flowers or street maintenance or something else. And the truth is, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't plan income from late payers. Use it and treat it as a penalty, because that's what it's intended for. What's nice about that, if you haven't banked on it for spending purposes, you can forgive it. If they did truly make a mistake, if they were in the hospital and they couldn't make their payment, and you have compassion and you want to forgive it, you as a board have the ability to do that. What you can't do, unfortunately, is forgive all the other fees that are associated. If the attorney has gotten involved and they have to start charging their fees, if you forgive that portion, the association eats that portion, because we can't go back to the attorney and say, oh, by the way, we're going to forgive this, so why don't you forgive yours too? Because the attorney is saying, gee, I did my work. I've already spent all the money paying the payroll to my staff to get that accomplished. I can't forgive it. So it's only your portion that you can forgive once they've actually got the late fee on and any other fees that have been attached. Take a look at the aging report. That is on the back of this civil code page. Now, most of you look at something similar to this every single month at your board meeting. And you go down the page. I just kind of want to clarify a few quick points for those that may not be aware of it. This is a list of 4 homeowners. And by the way, these names are made up. So, don't concern yourself with what the name is there. But on every page, at the top right corner is the date, typically the end of the current month, so you know what we're looking at here. Your meeting might be in the 3rd week of the following month. This report is the last day of the month we just left. So you're already seeing something a couple, 3 weeks old, but it gives you the time frame to work with. You understand that, okay, it was still late at that time. You can, if you choose to, I don't recommend it every month, but where you have a serious issue, you can ask your manager to go to bookkeeping and find out what's it like today. Did these payments get made? They'll be pretty happy to help you out with that. But then the sheet shows in the far right column, there's a date hanging out there next to one of the lines. This one happens to the top line. That date kind of tells us this is the date when they entered the collections process. That's when the payer lien letter got sent out. And so that kind of started the process. That date is going to hang there until the fee is paid. So the date doesn't change as far as when the process changes. It just tells us when this whole thing started. Then in the bottom line number 10 there, Lawrence Vehicle, he has a minus sign by his number because he is paid up in advance. Barbara's thought was, she thought it had to be $1,800 before you start the collection process, and that is not correct. It has to be $1,800 or been in the process 12 months before you can actually foreclose. Okay? The processes up to foreclosure can start flowing, but you cannot take the foreclosure itself until they reach that $1,800 or 12 months. I'll hit that again later, because I have a whole process we'll talk about there. So now, the confusing part about this for some people is that down at the bottom of the first column where it says customer balance, there's a number there of $2,243.50. And if you go to page 1 of your financial where the asset thing is, where it says accounts receivable, that number doesn't match that number. What's going on here? Well, keep in mind, the number on this column is the total between prepaids and those that are delinquent. So it's a combination of the two. You have to do a quick calculation if you want to see if the two numbers match. The fact is, the accounting system is pretty good. It does all that math for you. And when you look at the asset page where it says accounts receivable, that is just the amount that is owed by people. It does not include the prepaids, where this page shows you kind of both. So you can get a chance to see that. Then you may wonder, well, what's all those numbers down at the bottom? What's all that about? Why is it all broken out? It's broken out because when you start the collection process, remember what the civil code told us, all we can actually process through foreclosure is certain parts of the whole total they owe. We can do it for the maintenance fees. We can do it for recovery of lost damage assessments where they've damaged the property and you've assessed them for that, but you cannot do it for fines and penalties. So what they're doing is kind of shredding out the different parts of how those numbers got made up so you can see a better picture and basically how much of it is actually association dues, what's it called here, I hate that word dues, but they still use it, and how much is a late charge, for example. This one has an example of tree trimming because this association billed for some tree trimming. And Tree trimming might be a reimbursable assessment, although it's not classified as a damage assessment. But those are things the attorney helps us work out. But that's what that bottom section does, is help break out the numbers so we understand them. An assessment is an assessment of that type. It's not a penalty. The Civil Code's very specific on the fact that it lays out all these words in there about the fact that penalties and fines are not what you can foreclose on, but you could foreclose on assessments including special assessments. Okay? So, is that pretty well understood? And hopefully it cleared some things up for anybody who didn't understand how to read it. And I'll be happy to spend some time with you individually. If you've got a specific set of numbers on your delinquency report that you don't understand, you can always come by and talk to one of us, your manager, one of our accounting people, or myself. Yes?
On the prepaid, we have one homeowner sent a letter, prepaid for a year, but had accumulated fines and late fees. CC&Rs say that fines and late fees are taken out of payments first. So he was constantly in arrears. It came to be a 2 or 3 year issue. He said that since he said in his letter that his prepayment was just for dues, that we could not take the fines and things out of it.
That is a question for the attorney. I have to tell you, that's a specific point. And, you know, if your CC&Rs state one thing and you're following the CC&Rs, it might be that that is correct, but it also might be the law overrides that and says, nope, you were collecting the fines and penalties out when in fact you were supposed to be collecting assessments out. So that one goes to your attorney, okay? And there's lots of questions like that that will come up, I'm sure. So they were late. The late fee got assessed to them, and now time is moving on. When is it really the right time to send out that pay or lien letter, the stern warning letter? You know, that letter needs to go out. You need to wake them up and say, come on, either pay this thing or we are going to start the foreclosure process. I should let you know, by the way, in attorney language, the process we're going to start from the time they're delinquent is called the foreclosure process, even though the first part of it is a late letter or a late fee, and then there's a part for this pay or lien letter, and then there's the lien and all those pieces in there that we talk about, but the entire package is referred to as the foreclosure process. So when you hear that, you get kind of confused. Don't be confused. It's just the way that different people speak about the process. I like to refer to them as separate processes by name, and then I'm talking to people who speak differently, and I'm kind of confused. Why are we talking foreclosure process? I'm not there yet. I'm at the lien process now. Well, no, Steve, the whole process is called foreclosure process. So when you hear that kind of language, you'll be aware of the fact they're speaking of the entire process, not just that portion of it at the end of the line. When the late letter is going to, the pay or lien letter is going to go out, and when does all that happen? Typically, you've sent them the late statement between the 15th and the 30th day of being late. Now we're beyond the 30th day. We're into the next month. Sometime during that month, the pay or lien letter is going to get started. And a lot will depend on the specific circumstances. If we know we've got a deadbeat situation that needs to get this letter right now, it might go out a bit earlier, but at the same time, it may wait till the last half of that month because you think, well, is he just late on vacation? Is he going to come in? Let's not do it until we have to. But it will go out. And understand that management is going to put that out in accordance with your collection policies. If you desired not to have it go out, the board has to make a resolution that we're going to bypass our collection policy. And that's a big process by itself. You're better to follow your collection policy as you have it stated, so you're not making different individualized case pieces here. Follow the collection policy all the way through. So the letter's going to go out in the 30 to 60 day period. The next question is, well, who all gets the letter? You've probably seen statements come through where there's all these charges for all these letters that went out. Yeah, that's because the Civil Code says you have to send a letter to every single party to the ownership. So if it's a husband and a wife, 2 letters are going to go out, certified mail, along with 2 letters that went out by first class mail. There's 4 letters, just husband and wife. Oh, the kids own a portion of it too, and you've got 3 kids? No problem. Each one of those kids is going to get a copy of the letter. If they are on the deed as being an owner, they all get a part of the letter, and yeah, There's a fee involved in all those letters that have to go out, but that's why it's that way, is because the civil code requires it to be that way. You have to send the letter to all of the owners. Then the question comes up how we get the address information. I have to tell you, from a management perspective, getting the addresses is tough. You think the homeowner is going to keep you advised of their current address and current ownership. It just doesn't happen that way. We're like the stepchild over here in the corner. Management doesn't need to know all that stuff. I pay my bill on time, I'm doing fine. Of course, when they don't pay the bill on time, now I haven't got a clue who they are or where it is. It's amazing how many people will quit claim their property to their children or to their wife because of certain circumstances and never bother to tell management or the HOA. So we do have to go out and actually do some research to find out who actually is on the deed now that we're getting the process of sending out official documentation. So there is a process there, and yeah, like everything else, it costs money to do that. There is a challenge to keeping the owner listings up to date. Certainly if you find out that a ownership change has taken place and you discover that it's not the same name showing up on reports, get with your manager and identify that so we can help keep the list as current as possible. But trust me, management's going to go through and verify the ownership as they start sending out these letters. You've sent out the pay or lien letter. Now the next step's got to take place, and that's about 35 days following the date of that letter. You're sending a letter, you're saying, I'm going to give them 35 days. Why did they pick 35 days? I haven't got a clue why they picked those days, but it's probably because they know the mail is slow. They know that there's other circumstances involved, and they want to give them a month. So 35 days is the number they've picked. The next step then is the board, as a board, needs to authorize the steps that are about to take place. And you have to take them one step at a time. And in fact, the Civil Code clarifies that you have to take those steps with authority and be authorized to do it and do them in a certain manner, which we'll talk about. One of the questions earlier on was about the payment plan situation. Understand that the Civil Code says that a homeowner may request a payment plan. What that tells me is you're not obligated to offer it to them, but you should know that if they ask for it, you at least have to consider it. That's the important thing to know. And my recommendation is that you consider accepting a payment plan providing it's reasonable. Don't just dig your heels in and say, no, we want the full payment or nothing. If they really want to try and make an effort to make their payment, you're being a good neighbor by trying to accept the payment plan. But understand that you want the payment plan to be one that you and reasonable experts agree is a good payment plan, be it the attorney or the collections officer, however that works out, to make sure it's a reasonable collection plan. And then it really ought to be a collection plan that's written up. It's not a collection plan unless it's in writing. Today they call that written document the forbearance agreement. That's a technical term for the collection plan. It's a forbearance agreement that says, I agree to pay, and by the way, it also says, and if you don't pay, if you miss one payment, we're going to carry on the rest of the process without even talking to you. We're putting the onus back on you. Do what you said you're going to do. And that forbearance agreement kind of puts it all in writing so that they're locked in and they understand the importance of sticking with their payment plan. And if they don't stick with it, you can move right through the process without any further conversation with them. Okay, let's switch gears to that nice colorful sheet with all the boxes on it. We started touching on it briefly. This is a neat little page. If you need some additional copies of this for your fellow board members, right after the program today, see myself, one of the people up front here, we'll see if we can get you more copies, because this really simplifies it. It's not exact to everybody's need, but it's real close to the general operation of how the collection process works. With each box has a number assigned to it, so you can kind of look at it and say, well, we're in position number 1 right now. We're at the pay or lien letter situation. Notice that it does remind us again that what's going to happen is the offer of ADR, IDR. ADR is our alternative dispute resolution. IDR is internal dispute resolution. And the order of all that is a whole topic by itself, but every time you take the next step, you need to offer that to them. That's the one thing you're required to offer to them. And it pretty much comes out automatically. You don't have to get involved in the details. That's part of the automatic process that goes through. It gets offered to them. They do need to accept it if they want to make use of it. Now, number 2 says if the payment's not made, then your part steps in. At an officially called board meeting, and this is an open meeting, you have to approve the fact that you're being asked to approve a lien be placed on the unit. Now, it's really important that because of all this privacy stuff going on, don't use the person's name, try to be obscure if you can, but what we're all doing is trying to use that APN number, which is that number assigned by the county to that piece of property, so that you just have an identifying marker without talking about their names while you've got an open meeting going on with other people in the room. Obviously, if it's an open meeting but nobody else is there but board members, it's not a big deal to talk about it because you all know the name of the party you're speaking of, but do be careful about that. And it must be an open meeting, not an executive session for this portion. You need to sign off and say, we all agree we're going to lien this guy. Remember, as we talk about this all or a majority, the board is a single entity. You all, 5 of you or 7 of you, or in some cases 3 of you, make up the board. But the board being a single entity is what the civil code wants, the board to approve. So how do you approve this? The same way you approve everything else. You vote on it. And you may have one of the board members who says, I'm just against this. I don't want to do it. Well, that's fine. I have a motion on the floor that says we want to lien this. All in favor say aye. And if the majority says we're going to put a lien on, the board made that decision. I take this opportunity to emphasize, as I will from time to time, as a member of the board, once that decision is made, even though you don't personally agree with the decision that came out of this, you need to go along with what the board chose to do. Don't go behind the board's back and start backstabbing the board with conversation that says, boy, they really screwed up, they should never have done this, blah, blah, blah. If the board made a decision to go a direction, your comment needs to be, yes, our board agreed to that. Done. When your personal friend comes to you and says, but I talked to you, you said you were gonna, you can I did my part, but I'm a board member, and I'm going along with what my board chose to do. I'm not going to stab them in the back. We're working together to keep this community working well. Take that stand and don't fight your board and talk behind their back. So now you've got this piece of paper, you've talked about it, you've actually had a board motion to approve the lien, get that back to your manager, who in turn gets it back to the collections department at the company, who in turn processes it on to whoever handles your collections process. Typically, it's your attorney. You have an attorney that handles the collections process. Now the attorney's got the official piece of paper that says, I'm authorized to take the next step. And I'm sure part of that's just keeping it such that they don't get caught up having done something without your approval. But more than that, it's making you aware we're taking a serious action here. That's why they want you to do it at a board meeting and do the motion, because it's a serious action you're taking against one of your homeowners, one of your neighbors, one of your friends. So you sign the form. The association on box number 3 submits the lien authorization to the management office through your manager. And then the side box says that this lien authorization form is sent off to the attorney. We also send a whole package of information that goes with that. They get the ledger of account. They probably get the payment history on that account. They're going to get the policy that your board has approved for what the collection policy is to make sure it complies. And then they're also going to see that signed authorization so that they know everything's in place, we're above board, we're doing the right thing here. And then the next process is, and those yellow boxes kind of indicate we've now shifted gears. The management company kind of helped the board take care of the first green boxes, and now we're on to the yellow boxes because the attorney picks up the ball here, and the attorney continues to run with it from here. So the recorded notice of assessment lien, again, it's mailed separately to each owner, just like the payer lien letter was done. And they want to make sure they've got things right. If time has elapsed, they may send out another payer lien letter to make darn sure they've got all the right information, that all the right paperwork has been sent to them, so there's been no mistake in the process, because you recall from the civil code section, it says if you don't do it right, we get to start over. And there's a lot of cost in starting over. So the attorney's going to make sure that all the steps are taken. He may send another copy of a payer lien letter out. Then he's going to make another offer of what they call the pre-foreclosure offer of ADR, IDR, so that Again, he makes sure that homeowner knows we're offering you a chance to come in here and talk to us about this and clarify that, yes, you do owe the money. Most of the time they know they owe the money and they don't bother to talk to us about that. But that's what that process calls for, to make sure that they are aware and that you're aware that they're aware. Time goes on and you get to the notice of default and the election to sell. I noticed that that's kind of interesting language there. Now we're getting into some parts that are case specific because there's different scenarios going on here. Is the homeowner a very wealthy person who's just decided to dump this piece of property because maybe they're upside down on it and they've got lots of assets? They could be paying their HOA fees, but they've chosen not to because they're giving up the property. Or is this owner really financially strapped? There's no money in their hip pocket anyway, so what's the sense in going after them to this degree? All of those kinds of questions are for you and the attorney to look at and to discuss and figure out, is it the proper action to take? Which is kind of why they say the notice of default and election to sell. That's where you want to know what's going on. It's really kind of nice is, as a board member, you have a handle on that. You know who's in collection. You know a little bit more about them. Do they drive the Maserati or do they drive the Chevrolet? Or do they have businesses all over the country, or are they strapped? What's going on here? You can help the attorney help you make decisions on how we should proceed from here, starting at this process line. Now, this is the point, the notice of default is where they have to hit that threshold of $1,800 or a delinquency that's been longer than 12 months. Up until this point, that timeline, that dollar amount and timeline issue wasn't a big deal. But now we're getting to a point where we're actually going to start taking that step to real foreclosure. And so now, do all the dollar amounts line up, or does the timeline line up? When you start with the authorization for notice of default, just like that authorization to lien, it's a separate document, looks very similar. It's an authorization that the board has to sign to go into notice of default. That needs to be signed also, but interestingly, that one is done in executive session. I'm not exactly sure why they do one this way, one that way, but I think what it really does, it allows you as a board to get together and really talk about this. Do we want to do this? Again, this is our neighbor, our friend, this is our fellow member of the Homeowners Association. We are taking some serious action here. Do we want to do this? And you all sit down and you hash it out, and eventually you vote on it, and hopefully you all agree that it's a necessary thing, and then you sign the form and take the action. That's the purpose that the state has in this. And what really happened, just as a side note, there were some cases in Texas, I think it was, I'm not exactly sure where a board foreclosed on a unit that owed like $150 or some ridiculously small amount like that from a little old lady who her husband had died and she was in trouble, and she just took all these letters that she was getting addressed to her husband and stacked them up in the corner of the room because she didn't want to deal with them. She was so distraught over losing her husband, and they foreclosed. She was, I didn't know. And well, yeah, you should have known. We sent you all these letters. Well, I don't bother to read that. That's my husband. That's not me. And somehow, all that information got twisted just enough that the state of California says, okay, we're not having that happen anymore. We're going to make this thing so specific that you can't go in and make a mistake in doing the action you're going to do. Follow our instructions and you'll be above board and everything will be good. That's kind of why this got down to where it is because they don't want you making a mistake and possibly putting somebody in foreclosure by accident, okay? Once the notice of default has been authorized and you've given it back to the attorney and the attorney's starting to process down that road, the attorney's going to try and get the title report and help you determine if there's any equity in the property or are there other encumbrances? Is there a first and a second on this house? Is the house upside down? What's the status here? The attorney might also at that point may even start looking at what is the status of this owner? Are they wealthy? Do they have money, assets we can attach to, or are they deadbeats and really have nothing they can go toward? But that's where you see the red boxes then split off left and right. If they have equity and it's worth something, you take the box to the left. And if they really don't, you may choose to take the box to the right. So that's why those two boxes are there. Notice that this notice of trustee sale, and it says at least 90 days after the notice of default, that notice of default has to sit out there for a period of time. And you kind of groan and go, another 90 days? They're already late. They already owe us a ton of money. That's the way it goes. The fact is, you have to go through the process. So don't feel bad about the fact that it's taking time. Just kind of mark the time and know that it's taking time. They're going to send a notice to the recording office so it gets recorded. And they're going to send it out to publication so that it actually gets published in the newspaper so that anybody else who needs to know this can find out if they choose to. They're going to actually go out and post a copy on the property so that in case by chance they're not getting mail, at least we hand delivered it right there and got it to them. We've taken every possible step to let them know we're taking a very serious step here. They've done all they can to notify the homeowner. That's really what that's all about. And then they put the unit sale on the calendar. They calendar it so that it's now got a date assigned to it. And I don't know how many of you have been involved in foreclosure processes, but those dates jump all over the place. They'll get close to the date and then something happens and they change the date because something took place. And that's why I say it really is a moving target. We don't know what those dates are going to be because every case is individualized, but it does mean following it, kind of being aware of what's going on. As board members, understand that the only time you can conduct business is when? At a duly called board meeting, a noticed board meeting, okay? Now, some parts for the executive session, it used to be you could call that in the middle of the night and have it in the morning and not tell anybody and you were good. And as of January, that all changes. Now you have to notify all your homeowners at least 2 days in advance that you're going to have an executive session and you need to be able to put down what's on the agenda. And there's still some talk about exactly how that agenda is going to work because we got to keep it private. You know, the names and addresses got to kind of stay private, but we got to tell them what we're talking about. So my recommendation at this point is just put down we're going to discuss collections on, say, 3 specific units and don't name the units. But in any case, what I'm saying here is that you're going to have a board meeting and that's where you're going to get your information. It is really pointless to call the office 10 days later and say, well, is it all done yet? We can't conduct business between board meetings. You'll get your information at the board meeting. Your manager will help keep you informed because the manager is following things up. And so it isn't like no one knows what's going on, but because the processes take time, by the time your next board meeting comes through, there may not have even been any action then because it does take time. So allow the process to take its place. Don't lose sleep over all this. You're the board member. You have certain responsibilities to your board and to your homeowners. But if you're going to lose sleep over making sure this all gets done and gets done exactly right, and oh my gosh, relax. Trust the system. It will work. And although, yeah, there's always an opportunity for something to fall through the cracks, at every board meeting, you have all the paperwork presented to you so you can see what the status is on things and take care of the action at the board meetings. Now, if this house basically has no equity, then you might take the 8A recommendation, which is you file a lawsuit with the owner. And here again, it's a matter of finding out if that's even worthy or not. Again, if you've got an owner who simply hasn't got any money, they went through bankruptcy or they are about to, and they just don't have any money. Maybe it's not worth the effort to chase them down. That's a decision only you all can make. What's nice about that is you all are the perfect ones to know what's going on in your community. Your manager doesn't really know all these people individually like you do. So it is good for you to kind of be aware of who's on the list and what you know about them so you can make good, reasonable decisions based on your common knowledge of who these people are. Again, as a timeline, you've put the notice of default out. They're obtaining the title report, getting all that kind of stuff done. 90 days kind of has to elapse before you actually start calendaring the date on the courthouse steps. Okay? Then, if the sale is completed, there's all kinds of paperwork and things that have to go on with that, the preparing of the trust deed, and there is a right of redemption period. So if foreclosure does take place, if you decide to foreclose and now you become the owner, the truth is you got about 90 days waiting period because once you've actually said it's done, transfer is being made, they still have a chance to say, oh my gosh, I didn't know, let me have it back. And then do what they have to do to get it back. That's called the redemption period. And they need to have that time available. Don't get excited, it all just takes time. It does seem like 6 months is going to pass before this actually gets done. And yeah, it's going to take some time. That's why I'm saying don't lose sleep over it, relax. It all does take time. We know that it takes time. It's just a process we have to go through. And then of course, as a side note in box number 10, if payment is received, there's some processes there as well. There was talk early on about, so how come we can't take the payments and just deposit them in the bank? Why do you hold these payments? What's going on with all that? Well, there's a lot of detail to that. First of all, if they're in a payment plan, the forbearance agreement that you have them sign talks about the fact that we're going to collect your payments here, and we're going to hold on to them, and we'll post them to your account at the end of the process. They will probably, depending on how long the payment plan is, make interim payments during that process as part of the plan. But what you don't want to do is cause the lien to be released prematurely. But the fact is, if you don't have a proper forbearance agreement, a payment plan in place, and you take and you accept the money, what actually happens is that now, by law, you've accepted some money. They no longer owe $1,000, they owe whatever lesser amount because they paid a portion of it. You have to release that lien for $1,000 and start a new lien process. By the way, the process starts all over again. You're going to initiate a new lien. All that's really kind of crazy. So what they've said is, look, we're going to accept full payment only, and if you can't make full payment, we're going to send the check back to you unless you're in a payment plan where we can keep those payments. What typically happens is when they're in a payment plan agreement, the attorney puts that money in a trust account so it gets cashed and held on to, okay? That goes to say that if they're not in a forbearance agreement or a payment plan, then you need to send the check back because you really can't hold the check. You're not supposed to hold the check. Have attorneys held their checks when they really shouldn't? Yeah, we've seen that happen. We can't control what the attorney does, but for the most part, they will send that check right back because it's not full payment. In our case, we may not put it in a trust account. We may just go ahead and put it in your bank account. Okay. And because they're in a forbearance agreement, that agreement will specify some of those pieces. Again, each case is specific. If you, the association, make the agreement with them outside of the attorney, it might be handled one way. And if it's through the attorney, it'd be handled a different way. Those monies that are handled the first way through our office, we're going to deposit the money in your account. Yes, it gets posted to their account, and there's probably going to be a little indicator that says it's part of a payment plan, so we'll know that, or it'll be registered somehow. But it does get registered to their account. But we want to make sure we have it set up so it's in a proper agreement that we don't have to release the lien until it's finally paid in full. Because you want that lien out there as your pressure point. His question was in relation to box number 7, where they're talking about the step of going to foreclosure. Does the board have an obligation to take that step? And I'm going to say, from my perspective, the answer is no, they do not. They have to do what's logically correct for the circumstances at hand in the association. Once again, you don't want to be doing, you're a nice guy, we'll hold off on you, you're a mean guy, and we're going to make sure you follow every step. That's not the issue here. It's more on the order of, you don't have a dime to your name. To spend all that extra money to go down that particular path is going to be expensive. We're never going to collect it back anyway. Where this guy's got all kinds of buckets of money. We know we can collect from him, so we'll probably take that path. You're making logical decisions based on clear facts that you and the attorney can talk about and clarify. And you want to document some of that. His comment was, so you choose to go to box 8A on the right over here, and you decide through your logic and understanding of the situation that this guy to go into a lawsuit's not going to help us any. What do we do then? You're kind of like you're choosing to write it off. You realize it's just simply uncollectible. So you mark it as uncollectible and deal with your CPA and your attorney in making those decisions. At this point, I should say that I say it all the time to you folks. Your job is making decisions for the association with the assistance of those experts you can call upon. The law doesn't require you to be the expert. the law requires you to use the business judgment rule, which says you're going to ask experts what we should do and rely on the information they give you. So you'll talk to your CPA, you'll talk to your attorney, you'll talk to your manager, and you've dealt with your experts, and then you make a decision based on the information you've gathered. And that's really the important part of that. And you can consider all of those. Your manager, your CPA, your attorney, they're all part of the experts that you want to talk to find out what's the best route for us to take. Oh, that's a two-part question. Good. The first part of that question was the decision we make, assuming we're making a decision not to go forward because we're not going to sue this guy for his money, do we have to document that? Absolutely. You need, as a board, you document every decision you make. If it's a decision for action or a decision not to take action that could have or should have been taken, you need to document it. That's what the minutes are all about. So by all means, you document the fact the board discussed this issue, and based on the information we were provided, a decision was made, a motion was made and accepted and all that to go this direction, and you document that. Then the question came up, well, do we have to notify the homeowners? I'm not sure you do. I think that if it's at an open meeting where I think the notification to homeowners is when you talk about the executive session at the open meeting and you state at the open meeting, here's what we talked about and here's the decision we made. And you might go so far as to say, we talked about delinquencies. In one delinquent account situation, we chose not to take any further action. On another account, we chose to take this direct action, go this way. You're not talking about who they are. You're just stating this is what we did. So you are, in fact, notifying them to a degree, but do you have to send a letter out and notify and publicize? No, I don't think that's the case. You just have to make sure you follow the law when it comes to making sure that you document all the action you take in a board meeting and that you do document the actions taken in an executive session, that you announce what happened in the executive session in your open board meeting. She was talking about going into small claims court and the restrictions a small claims court has in place. And again, there's some specifics to that. I know that there's dollar amount limits and there's limits on how many times you can go in and get things done. I just don't have that at the tip of my tongue to expand on it for you, and I know it's changing. The law is right now in progress of making some changes on that. So I'll tell you what, as I get more information, I'll publicize it by way of that email blast that I do, so you'll get more information on that. There's definitely going to be ways to collect. The fact is that it's part of collection process. When you get down to this point of the red boxes, you're making decisions on what direction to go based on the circumstances you know about. One of those might be foreclosure. One of them might be lawsuit against the individual to collect the money, but another one might be we're going to pass this off to the collection agency who's going to take half of the proceeds for themselves. Another one might be going to small claims court and dealing with it that way. So there's a number of ways to go. All of that is what you talk about with the attorney. You look at this specific situation and make a good business judgment on the right direction to go on a case-by-case basis.
It's important to point out you can't turn it over to a collection agency while there's still an active owner. You got to wait until it's been taken back, or you have a foreclosure or bankruptcy. Not bankruptcy, a foreclosure by the bank. You can't turn it over because then you're compromising that assessment that Steve mentioned you're obligated to collect. So if somebody gets to $1,000 and you're like, well, we'll just turn it over to Coachella Valley Collections. You can't do that at that stage. You got to wait until Bank of America or whomever beats you to it. Otherwise, you're in a sense forgiving some of that debt that you're obligated to collect.
That was a good point. What I'm going to say to supplement that is talk to your experts about each individual case. Before you take the action, make sure the action is actionable, that you're permitted to take that action. So like you said, you're right. You can't turn it over to a collection agency until other things have taken place ahead of that. And you need to know all those things, which is why you want to talk to your experts. Okay, so if the bank forecloses, there's one of those cases. Now what's happening? Well, as most of you already know, your secured debt, that lien you have in place, is really no longer a valid lien. The question is, do you release the lien immediately or do you let the lien sit there? And there's debate on that, quite frankly. Our choice is that we let the lien sit there just because we think that when this finally does take a transaction, it's a red flag to somebody that says there's something going on here, and there might be a way of collecting some of that money, even though they could look at you and say, sorry, it's an invalid lien, get it out of here, and you have to get it gone. I get that. But That's, again, when you're looking at what happens after the bank forecloses, your issues change slightly, but you get together as a board at a duly called board meeting and go over what are our opportunities here? What direction should we go? And you get with your attorney and you find out, how should we proceed on this particular case based on what we now know? Nice thing is, once the bank has foreclosed, they are now an owner, and cha-ching, cha-ching, the money starts coming in. Wait a minute, does it really start coming in? They owe it, and they will pay it. But they may not pay it immediately. They may not pay it to you, the association, until the end of their process, which is to try and fix up the unit and get it sold to somebody else, but they will pay it. We have no cases that we're aware of on record where the bank has said, I'm not paying my HOA fees from the day I took it over. They have said they're not paying any of the HOA fees prior to them actually taking ownership. So what we're seeing happen, you're all seeing it, the bank is stalling. The owner is saying, I no longer want the property, I'm out of here. They've been threatened enough to get up and walk away. And the bank's saying, I don't care. I don't need that unit in my name. I'll just sit here on it. And what's the HOA to do? There comes a time when I don't know what to do next. One thing you might try doing is, again, consulting with your attorney to find out what the best methods are. But you might want to initiate foreclosure action on your part to help twist the arm of the bank. Get them to give in eventually and say, okay, yeah, we'll get our foreclosure process going. And then some actually like the idea of, the bank is not going anywhere with this thing. We've twisted their arm as hard as we can. They're still not taking any action. Then foreclose. And then take ownership and then rent the unit out, at least for enough money to collect your HOA fees. Is that expensive? Could be. Is it collectible? Could be. The fact is that all these circumstances are individual, but let's assume for the sake of conversation, you have a unit, you now own it, you rent it out, the amount owed on it is, let's talk about assessments, $300 a month is an HOA fee, and you're going to rent it out for $1,000 or $1,500 or $3,000 a month, whatever the value of the unit happens to be, and you can start collecting. We got to spend $5,000 or $10,000 to fix it all up. Then we're going to rent it out. How long will it take us to get our rents back? How long will it take us to get the money back that has been owed to us by the prior owner? All those things fit into place, and you make a valued judgment call on that. That's really where that's at. How can you collect at that point? We talked about that briefly. You can, again, at the advice of your attorney, with the understanding of all the pieces that are in place, you can make a decision to go a number of different directions. Ask the attorney to chase this guy down the street. Go to small claims court. Get a collection company involved. Once it's been foreclosed upon, there are other options like that available. And again, a lot depends on whether or not you're able to serve this guy. He may be gone, just unavailable, can't find him. And he may also have other properties and other places where you can attach. So all those play a part in this. I do say that some of the options you have could be risky. There may be a case where you make a decision to go in this direction, and when you finally get going in that direction, you go, uh-oh, wasn't quite the right direction to go. We spent some money to get here, and we lost all that money. That happens. Again, it's a business decision you make as a board with the advice of your experts. And finally, one of the last comments down here is, should you foreclose? And I think we pretty well hit that. I do think that there's cases where you should. And that's a case-by-case basis. But then, do you assume the unpaid loan to the bank if you foreclose? And the answer is technically, yeah, that loan is part of it goes with the land. So you're taking on that obligation. Well, do you pay it? I wouldn't. No, I don't think so. You're going to be just like that homeowner who wasn't paying, and you're going to go to the bank and say, hey, we now have the deed, but we're not paying it. Start taking action. What you're trying to do is twist their arm to get them to take their action. And in some cases I'm aware of, they can't even find the bank. They know what bank it is, but nobody will talk to them. We know that one, don't we? So then the question comes up, well, do they have to pay monthly assessments? Well, let me see here. This is your association. Do you have to pay yourself for that? Well, no, you don't. But the truth be known is that that amount that was owed is an uncollectible that becomes part of the cost of the unit. So as this thing finally gets out of your hands and gets moved over into somebody else's hands because it gets sold or whatever happens there, then there's this, the cost you incurred to do what you did is all part of the cost that is offsets those rents you collected. So you realize that as an association, your income is held in certain ways. Some income is that nonprofit income and not taxable. Other income, interest on your bank accounts, and maybe rents like this, could be taxable. So you have to look at all that, and your CPA will tell you, well, I can lower your income over here if I know what you spent against it, and those HOA fees that you didn't pay yourself are all added up as part of that expense. So it kind of takes care of itself there. And I do recommend that if you decide to take ownership, that you be sure and get an account line opened up in the bookkeeping that says expenses for the house, so that you have a way of tracking what those expenses are. I'm ready for questions. I can't possibly have covered everything. Yes? 2 questions there. The first one was to talk again about the redemption process. I may not have made that really clear. Once the foreclosure has taken place, the owner whom you foreclosed against could have remorse and realize, I goofed. I didn't want you to take ownership. I really intended to pay for this thing. I was just stalling off as long as I could. He finally wakes up to the fact that, my God, they've taken my property. That redemption period is after foreclosure has taken place. We've left the courthouse steps. The association now theoretically owns the property. We have to wait 90 days for this deadbeat to change his mind and decide, oh, okay, I'll pay the bill. And that's the way the court looks at it. And again, it's that process is done that way because they don't want you as a board to have made a mistake and done something that you shouldn't have done. They've got all these steps in place to help prevent you from making a serious mistake. The second part of that question was, as a board member, can you actually make a bid on the property? And I think you can. Yeah, I haven't got a problem with that. Okay, I've hit you once before. Let me get one back here. Yes?
I'm a little confused. I thought once you place a lien on a property, that the lien must be satisfied before the escrow closes. But I heard you saying that the bank doesn't have to accept it.
That's correct. The fact is that when the bank forecloses, that's a whole different thing than the sale of the property from one owner to another. They are taking back the equity, so to speak, the, give me the right term here, the house becomes the...
They're the senior lien on the property.
Yeah, that is senior lien on the property. They had that property is what they have. They're holding up here to say, pay me back or I'll take your property away from you. So they can do that and all subordinate liens get wiped out. Next question.
In the process of forgiving late fees and things, can you require homeowners to go automatic payment?
I think the answer is no. The fact of the matter is, I personally recommend that as a board, if you're going to start dealing with this homeowner and making deals with the homeowner, one of the deals you ought to offer with them, thank you, one of the deals you ought to offer with them is, why don't you go on automatic payment so that the payment gets here on time and that problem of being late goes away. And I recommend that in cases where I've dealt with it. I've got a homeowner who's been late 3 times. And they're racking up late charges. And they're really unhappy. Why am I have to pay this late charge? I don't want to pay the late charge. Well, I'll make you a deal. I'll wipe out your late charges if you'll go on automatic payment plan so that now we can collect the money automatically. And that's a good deal to make. Yeah, you didn't get to collect those late fees, but now you've got somebody who's paying on time automatically. So there's offers like that you could make, but it's not required. You got one back here first. You get your turn. Yes.
One is executive sessions that are posted. Does it just have to be posted on the clubhouse, or does that have to be sent out to letters to everybody?
When you post for a meeting, with the executive session after January 1st or any of your open meetings, you post them in the standard place where you post official notices. So if you're posting your open meeting notices in bulletin boards around the property, this one gets posted there. There is a part of the law that says if an owner requests to be notified by mail, you have to do that. I don't like to publicize that because that just increases your costs and all that crap going on with having to deal with how do we mail this guy and don't mail this guy. But if they request it, it has to be mailed. I'm going to come back here real quick. I'll put you off several times. His question was, during the process of redemption period, can that owner still live there? And technically, you become the owner, and I would start the process of getting them evicted because that's going to take a long time by itself. But do they have a right to live there? I don't think they do. You are now the owner. If they have no intention of redeeming, they need to get them out of there. If they really are seriously thinking of redemption, as a thoughtful neighbor, you might say, well, let's get it paid. Let's do your part, and we won't kick you out, kind of thing. Yeah, what if there's a renter in there? A tough one. But the fact of the matter is, in some cases, you might be saying, by the way, start paying your rent to us now. We now own the property. And they'll do that. In other cases, you may have to kick them out. I mean, again, it's all case by case on a specific case. But the rental agreement they have is with that owner. They don't have it with you. So you may want to go in and get a new, fresh rental agreement. But that, to me, that sounds like kind of a nice deal. I've got the rental thing coming in. Good. Let's start collecting rents from this person. Go in, talk to them, share with them what's going on. We now took ownership, so you need to start paying us. And if they don't pay you, you kick them out in the usual defined manner by law.
You agree to a payment plan. The person starts making payments, then defaults on the payments. You agree to another payment plan. They start making payments again. How many times, is there any limit on when we should just say, no more, and go ahead with the foreclosure?
Did you all hear that? That scenario happens so much. You know, you make that first payment plan, and then they default on that, and they come begging back, please, I want to get back on my payment plan. So, okay, fine, we'll do it again. So you make a new payment plan, and then they default on that one. How often do you let that go on? The law, if I understand it correctly, is once they've missed that payment, you have the right to move forward with the collection process as per the colored sheet. Just keep on moving down the line and say, sorry, buddy, you and I made a deal, you defaulted on the deal, you're done. Or you can say, I appreciate the fact you had a problem, all right, let's try it one more time. But I think as a logical board, you'd want to somehow make it stern enough that he understands I'm not going for a third chance. I think there does come a time for limits. You know, you want to get it done and over with, but and some people, I think you've met a few in one of your associations, will drag this thing on forever. So you have to make a logical decision to stop it at some point. His comment was so the person is now 2 months behind, they owe a certain amount of money, 2 times $400, $800, and then they make a payment of $400. Well, they made the payment against that first one. Yeah. And so they could stay a month behind for a long time, but if they're late with the current month payment, we can tack on that late fee, twist their arm and say, I'm going to keep tacking on late fees until you get caught up, buddy, because that's the way the system works. But I wasn't late on this one. Yeah, you were, because that payment you just made applied to this one back here. And you just help them understand it, be logical about it. And this is not a conversation you have to have with them. This is a conversation we can have with them so they understand the process. Certainly if you're talking to them, you need to understand it as well. But that's really, you know, you want to stay as friendly homeowners if you can, but you also want to follow the points and get us involved where you need to.
Following up on that, if your CC&R say that any payment made pays the late fees first and then the payment, that payment is no longer a full month's payment because it's paying the late fees, then they stay delinquent even that month.
Yeah, and that's such a touchy one. He was talking about the fact, again, if he has other fees on his account and they make a payment equal to the regular assessment, but you got these late fees and other penalties on here and your CC&Rs direct you to pay those penalties first, how do you deal with that? And I don't have a good, clear answer for that myself. I think that, again, that's a case-by-case basis. The attorney will help you figure out what to do with that. Certainly, the starting point is you notify them. According to our CC&Rs, I'm obligated to apply the payment in this manner. So unfortunately, you're still behind on your HOA fees. You've now paid your other problem here, but you're still behind here. And you write a nice, thoughtful letter to them that says this is the way it is. And again, as a board member, you're not the bad guy here. The CC&Rs are the heavy-handed bad guy. They are there, and you are just simply trying to help follow those. His comment was, as an individual board member, the late payer comes over to me and wants to talk about a payment plan, you need to do it at a board meeting, and I think your manager needs to be at that meeting. And in some cases, depending on how long it's been going on, you might want to have the attorney at that meeting so they get the point that we're making a real deal here. It's not just a whiffy little thing that we're going to make some thoughts. I do want to caution you, as board members, you do want to be careful not to make deals outside the boardroom. Your deal ought to be inviting them to the boardroom. Why don't you come on in, let's talk about it. Let's work out the situation with the board. But you're right here now, I can talk, I'd like to talk to you, but I'm just one board member. I don't have the authority of the board. And even though the board has appointed the treasurer to do his part, and the treasurer's going to handle all the finances, no, you don't want the treasurer even being authorized to make those decisions on behalf of the board. Let's get him into an official location in a boardroom. Now you could as a board make a decision that, look, we don't want to deal with all this. Our specific board member is going to be authorized to make those deals, and we're going to accept the deal he makes. That's fine, but don't do it out on the street or by the pool. Let's do it in an official location in a meeting room where it now becomes official and gets properly documented. When you're dealing with a homeowner on a personal private matter, they have the right to have it in executive session, yes. If they bring it up in open session and want to talk about it, you're not required to stop it, but it's always nicer to take that out of the room so you're not tying up all these people listening to one guy's deal. Yes?
On your chart, number 2, where if you're going to approve a lien, it does need to be in an open meeting by 8 p.m. Has that always been the rule, or is that after January?
No, that's always been the rule. Yeah, the whole privacy thing started a number of years ago where they don't want you talking about a homeowner's personal business in a public forum. So they want it done kind of privately. But that's what was crazy about this particular law. They said when it comes to talking about a lien, do it in the open meeting, but don't talk about the person. So we have to have this secret code word to talk about who we're talking about here, but we have to do it at an open meeting in a public forum. They straightened it out with the NOD, the notice of default, where they now say, yes, go take that to executive session so you can actually openly talk about it easily. But your documentation on that is again done with those code words, the APN number or some other way of identifying the owner to help keep the privacy part private. Special assessments is a tricky one. You asked that in a tricky kind of way. His question was, can you do special assessment on an individual homeowner? And then you kind of tagged onto that like a landscaping fine. Well, you can assess an individual owner a special assessment where they've damaged the common area and you're getting a reimbursement to correct that damage. That's called a damage assessment. And yes, an individual owner can be assessed separately for the damage they caused to repay the association for that. Can you decide that, I can't think of an example where you can actually have a special assessment without that kind of a reasoning being in place for an individual owner.
But they will say they took out all their front landscaping, all their lights, all their trees.
They destroyed the common area.
Well, I don't know, is that common area if it's the front yard?
I think I see where you're going on the special assessment. It's kind of a clever way to phrase it so you can go after it in this process. I know you're saying what you're talking about there is a penalty. That's a fine.
Okay.
A reimbursement assessment, should you advance the funds to restore that common area or that front yard, that's going to be handled separately, separate from a regular or special assessment.
Okay.
Let's see, first.
You're correct. If the board decides not to go down the path because there's nothing to gain from this person, you said in an open meeting you have to disclose that you decided not to collect against a certain property. You don't mention who it is, but that you are not going after. Did you say that?
The decisions you make in executive session need to be noted in the next set of minutes of the open meeting.
Okay.
So technically you're declaring that, yes.
Right. Do you need to disclose if somebody asks a question in that meeting? Why aren't you going after those people?
Do you need to disclose that if somebody asks the question, why aren't you going after those people? And I think the logical answer to that is You made a good business judgment rule. I'm sorry that most of the conversation is executive session material. I cannot discuss it, but we did have adequate experts guide us on this process, and based on what we learned, we had to make this business call for the betterment of the association. A nice fluffy statement like that to help them get past it is the way it goes. You're going to have somebody in there who says, I want to know the details. I want to know why you, and all the, you know, you're going to get that. And I
train them up how to do the same thing.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Her question was, because the bank is so slow in taking their action and the homeowner has walked away because maybe they're upside down, whatever the issue is there, how do we twist the bank's arm to get moving on things? And that's the toughest question we're all looking at in today's market. We are having a tough time with that. It's all on a case-by-case basis. In one case, I actually highly recommended start the foreclosure process and see if the bank doesn't react to that. In the old days, they did. You start that foreclosure process, they jumped on it. And they went after that homeowner and got things squared away. I've had cases where the bank actually paid all the back HOA fees and applied it to the homeowner's loan. I mean, I've seen that happen. And so, okay, that was nice back then, but not anymore. Today, they're having a problem paying all the HOA fees. They are slowing down, so that's where you have to look at all the parts of the picture and make a decision, how are we going to proceed on this? And yes, you want to try to do what you can to force the hand of the bank to take ownership, because once they take ownership, the money's going to start coming in. It may not come in immediately, but at least it's on the table.
Let me jump in here on that, because I can kind of ride on both the comments. Your comment, Mike, going back on when you should take action, when you shouldn't. You're going to go out there and see that maybe the senior lender has already filed their notice of default and they've got a calendar for sale, let's say December 1st. So you're probably going to wait that time. You're going to see if they're going to actually affect the sale, and then now you have a dues paying member. Otherwise, if maybe it's calendar for December 1st, like Steve said, now there's a delay and now they take it out to April. Okay? Now we pick up your scenario. Okay, this could go on forever. They could keep postponing this sale. First thing is, it's going to take roughly
They foreclosed that we can fill.
Right, but it could take you $1,500 to $2,000 to affect the actual notice of default and election to sale and go through the foreclosure process. It comes down to your assessments. We have some communities' assessments are $85. Do you want to spend $2,000 to foreclose? Basically, if they get them out within 2 years, you're better off. So you have to weigh it on a per case basis. But then also you mentioned something that's interesting. Say that person, we live in the desert, obviously a lot of second homes. So one of the things that we've been checking is, did that person always receive mail at that property? Maybe that person received mail up in Santa Monica. Well, we know Santa Monica is a pretty nice place. Maybe that guy has property up there. This was one of those, I'm going to take some equity out of my home, come down and give myself a desert home so I can come down with my friends. Okay, well now we've got another piece of property. So Betty, to your point, maybe then we do go to small claims court. When you go to small claims court, 90% of the time you're going to get a judgment. The board doesn't necessarily have to go. There's a form you can file that will allow us to appear on your behalf. Yes, there's fees. Sorry, but there's time involved. If you guys go do it, it'll run you about $50 and it's pretty much a done, because we'll give you all the information and you go in. Then when you get that judgment, we're going to go back and we're going to say, okay, Mr. Smith, here's the judgment. You owe us $2,000. Probably he's not going to pay again. Now you go back to the court and you get an abstract of judgment and you say, look, Your Honor, we won this judgment. This guy owes us $2,000. You guys said it 2 months ago. We want this money and he won't pay. Okay, we give you an abstract of judgment. Now you get to where you can go ahead and record that abstract in various counties, and that judgment's good for 10 years and it's renewable. And it accrues interest at 12%. And Dad, you just had one that paid off from how long ago?
6 years ago.
6 years ago.
So it's a per case basis. We wish we could set up here and give you those steps that we gave you 1 through 10, follow them, but you really can't. The other thing that we found here, even locally, is people are making business decisions. They bought a home, they're upside down in it, but they have a great job. Some are doctors, and they're saying, you know what, I'm never going to recoup the money I have in this house, so I'm going to walk away. And while we wish they'd be a good neighbor and take care of the people around them and pay their HOA fees, and what they do to the bank is their own business, but then they move 2 blocks over and buy a brand new house. Well, that's low-hanging fruit, folks. You got to go after that person and go ahead and get your judgment and go over there and serve it on them. So it's really there's not a complete blueprint for this.
But you'll know how to take action because you're dealing with your experts who are help giving that kind of guidance. Yes. She asked if we've heard of cases where we've done a small claims action against a bank that fails to take proper action in a foreclosure for a long period of time. There is a case in Florida where they've actually forced the hand of the bank and actually told the bank, look, you either take your action or we're going to wipe out this loan and let the HOA have this piece of property free and clear. And they did. There were two cases I'd heard of, and both cases were handled differently. One case, they got the property, and one case, the bank ponied up and did their part. That has not happened in California, and what's interesting is the attorneys I'm talking to aren't talking about it. I'm not sure why, so I'm suspicious there's something in California the banks have done a good job of making sure you can't do that to them here. I'm just not sure what that good job is.
But that doesn't mean you wouldn't get their attention.
True. I think, again, it's a matter of how much money do you want to spend to make all this happen. And as board members, I'm hoping that you moved into your units, your condominium community or your homeowners association to live a life, not to run the association. If your purpose in moving there was to move in, to take over and run the association, you took on more than I'd take on. The fact of the matter is, you moved in there to live your lives. That's why you have professionals to assist you in getting things done. And yes, it all costs money, but you know what? We are here to help you. And when you look at the big picture, the amount of money you spend on getting these things taken care of by your professionals is nothing compared to the stress on your life. You know, you don't need some of these stresses. I need to close the meeting itself. I'm not going to kick you out of the room. I encourage you again to do the welcome thing in your community because you'll cut back on delinquencies and things. Thank you all very much for being here, and thank you.